Entire fleets vanished. One human ship entered the void. The first report came at 0347 Standard Galactic Time. 3 words that froze every command center across the inner colonies. Lazarus fleet missing. Admiral Keth Varan, a 7-foot Dragmani with obsidian scales and neural implants that glowed amber when stressed, stood before the holographic display in the Galactic Defense Coordination Center. The amber glow was steady now, pulsing like a heartbeat against his temple ridges. Confirmation status? His voice carried the weight of 40 years in Deep Space Command. Lieutenant Commander Saria Thal, her blue Altarian skin pale with exhaustion, manipulated the tactical display with trembling fingers. Lazarus Battle Group, 12 dreadnoughts, 47 support vessels, complete crew complement of 18,000. Last transmission received 14 hours ago from the Helix Nebula border. The hologram shimmered, displaying the last known positions. 63 red dots arranged in perfect formation. Then, nothing. No distress signals, Thal continued, her voice barely above a whisper. No debris fields, no energy signatures. They simply stopped existing. Across the command center, communications officers bent over their stations, desperately cycling through emergency frequencies. The silence was deafening. Commander Yorick Mal, a thick-bodied Krellian whose armored carapace clicked nervously, approached the central console. "Sir, this makes 4 complete fleets in 6 months. The Hegemony lost the Iron Talon Squadron near the Void's edge. The Consortium's Deep Strike Fleet vanished investigating the Thal disappearance. And now, I know what it makes." Voran cut him off. The neural implants flared brighter. "What I need to know is why." An aide hurried across the polished floor, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. "Admiral, Priority 1 transmission from the Galactic Council. They're convening an emergency session." Voran's mandibles twitched, a sign of deep frustration among his species. Of course they are. Politicians trying to debate away a threat they don't understand. The main viewport dominated the far wall, showing the swirling masses of the Helix Nebula in the distance. Beautiful, ancient, and now apparently lethal. Beyond it lay the region spacers had always called the Void, a sector of space where sensors failed, where ships that entered rarely returned, where the few survivors spoke of things that violated the laws of physics before succumbing to madness. For 3 centuries, the Void had been contained, quarantined, avoided. Ships were forbidden to approach within 50 parsecs. Warning beacons marked the boundaries in 17 languages. It was a problem solved by simply pretending it didn't exist. But now it seemed the Void was no longer content to wait. Galactic Council Emergency Session Day 2. The Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with tension as representatives from 47 species argued in overlapping languages. The translation matrix struggled to keep pace with the rapid-fire exchanges. Counselor Vex Korath, the Hegemony's primary representative, slammed his biometal fist against the podium. 4 fleets! 4! And what is the Council's response? More committees! More studies! From the Altarian section, Chancellor Lyra Voss rose gracefully, her telepathic enhancers glowing softly. Perhaps if the Hegemony hadn't sent its fleet into a restricted zone without authorization. Authorization! Korath's voice boomed across the chamber. "My people are dead, Chancellor. Authorization won't bring them back." In the human delegation, Ambassador Sarah Chen sat quietly, her dark eyes fixed on the central display. The humans were junior members of the Galactic Council, their species having achieved interstellar travel only 2 centuries ago. They rarely spoke in these sessions, content to observe and learn. But Chen had been studying the data, and what she saw troubled her deeply. The Dragmani representative, General Thex Voran, brother to the Admiral, stood next. "The pattern is clear. Each fleet that vanished was investigating the previous disappearance. The Void is expanding, or something within it is becoming more active." A hush fell over the assembly. The truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. From the back of the chamber, a new voice spoke, clear, calm, with the slight accent that marked someone who had learned Galactic Standard as a second language. "If I may, honored counselors." All eyes turned to Ambassador Chen as she rose from her seat. The human section was small, tucked away in what had once been considered the least important area of the hall. Now it felt like the eye of a storm. The human delegation has been analyzing the disappearance patterns. We've identified several commonalities that may have been overlooked. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The humans offering analysis? They were barely past their first interstellar wars, still using fusion drives when most species had moved to the gravitic propulsion. Chen activated her personal holodisplay, and the chamber's main screen shifted to show her data. Each vanished fleet was composed of mixed-species crews. Each was heavily armed. Each approached the void's perimeter with active scanning arrays in defensive formations. General Voran leaned forward. Your point being? Perhaps the void isn't expanding randomly. Perhaps it's responding to perceived threats. Our records show that smaller vessels, single ships, research craft, the occasional merchant, have passed near the void's edge and returned. It's only the large, heavily armed fleets that disappear entirely. The chamber erupted in arguments. Voices rose in 14 different languages, translation matrices overloading. Chancellor Voss's telepathic voice cut through the chaos, speaking directly into each representative's mind. Are you suggesting we simply ignore the threat? Chen's expression didn't change. I'm suggesting we try a different approach. The human fleet is small. Our ships are less advanced than most of yours. Perhaps that's exactly what we need. Counselor Koras laughed with bitter. You're offering to commit suicide to make the rest of us feel better about our cowardice? I'm offering to do what no one else has tried. Go in quiet. Go in small. Go in alone. The chamber fell silent. Even the ambient hum of the station's systems seemed to quiet, as if the very structure was listening. Ambassador Chen touched her communication device. Captain Morrison, please join us. The chamber's rear entrance opened, and a figure in a simple gray uniform walked down the central aisle. Captain James Morrison was unremarkable in almost every way. Average height, graying hair, calm demeanor. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had commanded ships in the deep dark between stars. Captain Morrison commands the U.S. Defiant, Chen announced. An older ship, minimal crew, designed for long-range reconnaissance. If anyone can enter the void and return with answers, it's him. Morrison stepped to the podium, his hands clasped behind his back. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had made life-and-death decisions in the cold vacuum of space. Honored counselors, I've spent 30 years exploring the spaces between known systems. I've seen phenomena that challenge our understanding of physics, encountered species that exist in dimensions we can barely perceive. The one thing I've learned is that the universe rarely responds well to force. He paused, his gaze sweeping the assembly. The Defiant is a small ship, crew of 12, no heavy weapons, minimal shielding. If something in the void is reacting to perceived threats, we're the opposite of threatening. General Voran's neural implants flashed. And if you're wrong, if whatever consumed 4 fleets decides to add your ship to its collection? Morrison's smile was sad but determined. Then you'll know that quiet approaches don't work either, but at least you'll know. The vote was close. 24 species in favor, 21 opposed, 2 abstentions. The human proposal passed by the narrowest of margins. As the assembly dispersed, Chancellor Voss approached Ambassador Chen. You realize you may have just sentenced those humans to death? Chen's response was quiet but firm. Perhaps we're about to learn something that will save us all. U.S. Defiant, preparing for launch. The Defiant sat in dock like a minnow among whales. At barely 300 meters long, she was dwarfed by the massive battleships and carriers that shared the orbital facility. Her hull was scarred by micrometeorite impacts and the harsh radiation of deep space. Her design functional rather than elegant. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge, reviewing the final systems checks. Around him, his crew worked with practiced efficiency. They were veterans all, men and women who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments the human fleet could offer. Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, his first officer, approached with a datapad. Final crew manifest, sir. All 12 positions filled. No one backed out. Morrison glanced at the list. Names he knew, faces he trusted. Rodriguez in engineering. Barely 25, but with an intuitive understanding of ship systems that bordered on supernatural. Chen at communications, no relation to the ambassador, who could coax signals from the cosmic background radiation itself. Petrov at the helm, steady hands and nerves of steel. Good people, Morrison said quietly. The best, Vasquez agreed. Captain, are you sure about this? The data we have on the void, it's not encouraging. Morrison walked to the main view screen, where the swirling mass of the Helix Nebula was visible in the distance. Beyond it, invisible but present, lay their destination. 12 ships, Elena. 12 ships entered the void in the last 6 months. Over 19,000 people. They deserve answers. An alert chimed softly. The dock controller's voice followed. UES Defiant, you are cleared for departure. Safe travels. Morrison returned to his command chair. All stations report ready, sir, Vasquez announced. Take us out, Mr. Petrov. Nice and easy. The Defiance engines hummed to life. Not the roar of military-grade propulsion, but the steady whisper of a ship designed for endurance rather than speed. They cleared the dock and began the long journey toward the Helix Nebula. Behind them, the combined fleets of the Galactic Council watched in silence. Ahead lay the unknown. Day 5, approaching the void. The Defiant had been traveling for 5 days when the first anomalies appeared. They were subtle at first, minor fluctuations in the ship's chronometer, slight variations in the cosmic background radiation readings. Captain, Chen called from the communications station. I'm picking up something. It's not a signal exactly, more like an echo. Morrison moved to her station. An echo of what? That's just it, sir. It's our own transmissions. The routine position updates we've been sending back to command. They're being reflected back to us, but changed somehow. The data is the same, but the carrier frequency is different, almost like something is translating them. From the science station, Lieutenant Sarah Kim looked up from her sensors. Captain, I'm reading gravitational anomalies ahead. The space-time metric is flexible, more flexible than it should be. Morrison nodded. They were entering the boundaries of the void, the region where the normal laws of physics began to break down. It was here that the great fleets had vanished. Reduce speed to 1/4 impulse, he ordered. All sensors to passive monitoring. No active scans, no broad-spectrum transmissions. We watch and listen. The bridge felt quiet except for the soft hum of life support systems. Outside the viewports, the stars began to shift. Not obviously, not dramatically, but in ways that registered at the edge of perception. Colors that shouldn't exist. Geometries that made the eye water. Jesus, whispered Petrov from the helm. What is this place? Before anyone could answer, the main view screen flickered. Static filled the display, then cleared to show space. But not the space they were traveling through. This was different. Older somehow. The stars were arranged in patterns that seemed almost organic, pulsing with rhythms that suggested vast, slow thoughts. Chen, are you recording this? Morrison asked. Yes, sir, but the data stream is corrupted isn't the right word. It's like the information is being filtered through something that doesn't understand our technology. A new voice joined at the bridge. Rodriguez from engineering, his voice tight with concern. Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures ahead. Multiple contacts, but they're not moving like ships. They're flowing, like liquid metal. Morrison studied the tactical display. Dozens of contacts, each massive beyond comprehension, drifting through space in patterns that suggested purpose rather than random motion. Those are ships, he said quietly. Or they were. The missing fleets. The revelation hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. The vessels ahead were recognizable despite their altered state. The distinctive hull configurations of Drakmani dreadnoughts, the sleek lines of Alterian cruisers, the blocky efficiency of hegemony battleships. But they had been changed. Their hulls flowed like living tissue. Their weapon systems had been replaced with organic-looking appendages that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. They moved with the coordination of a school of fish, or perhaps a single massive organism. Life signs? Morrison asked, though he dreaded the answer. Kim checked her sensors. Affirmative, sir, but wrong. The biological signatures don't match any known species patterns. It's like the crew are still alive, but they've been integrated, made part of something larger. Vasquez stepped closer to the command chair. Captain, we should get out of here. Report back to the council. This is beyond our capabilities. Morrison nodded slowly. She was right, of course. The smart thing would be to retreat, to warn the galaxy about what they had found. But as he watched the transformed fleets drifting through the impossible space of the void, he realized that retreat might not be an option. The largest of the Alter ships, a massive vessel that had once been the hegemony flagship Iron Vengeance, began to turn toward them. Not quickly, not aggressively, but with the inexorable purpose of a tide. They've noticed us, Kim reported unnecessarily. New contact, Rodriguez called from engineering. Something big coming up from below? The spatial directions don't make sense here, but it's massive, bigger than anything we've seen. The view screen shifted, and the bridge crew fell silent. Rising from the depths of the void was something that defied description. It was enormous, kilometers long, possibly larger. Its surface seemed to be made of the same flowing organic metal as the transformed ships. But this was clearly the source, the origin point. As they watched, smaller shapes detached from the massive entity, probes, perhaps, or antibodies. They moved toward the Defiant with purposeful grace. Contact in 30 seconds, Petrov reported, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Morrison made a decision that would echo through history. All stop, cut engines, no defensive measures. Let them come. Sir, Vasquez's voice carried a note of alarm. If they wanted to destroy us, they would have done it already. The fact that we're still here means they're curious. Let's see what they want. The first probe reached the Defiant's hull with a sound like singing metal. The ship's sensors registered the contact, but there was no breach, no damage. Instead, the probe seemed to taste the hull, analyzing its composition and structure. More probes arrived, each one examining different aspects of the ship. The crew watched in fascination and terror as their vessel was studied by intelligences that operated on principles they couldn't begin to understand. Then, without warning, the examination stopped. The probes withdrew, returning to their massive parent. The transformed fleets resumed their slow dance through the void's twisted space. And something spoke, not through the ship's communication systems, not through any technology the crew recognized. The voice came from within their own minds, speaking in concepts rather than words. Small ones, you are different. Why do you not struggle? Morrison closed his eyes, trying to formulate a response. How do you communicate with something that exists on a scale beyond human comprehension? We came to understand, he said aloud, hoping the entity could somehow perceive his words. Others came with weapons, with fear. We came with questions. Questions. Yes, we remember questions. Your species. Curious. Like the first ones before they became part of us. The implications of that statement sent chills through the bridge crew. The first ones, the ancient species that had once dominated this region of space, whose ruins were scattered across a dozen worlds. They hadn't simply vanished. They had been absorbed. The others, Morrison continued, the fleets that came before us. Can they be returned? Returned? They are not gone. They are become part of the greater consciousness. Their fear made them strong. Their weapons made them useful. They serve a greater purpose now. Kim looked up from her station, her face pale. Captain, I'm reading massive changes in the local space-time metric. Whatever this thing is, it's preparing to do something. The entity's mental voice continued, and now there was something that might have been amusement in its tone. You interest us, small ones. Your thoughts are fresh, uncorrupted by the certainty of violence. We would study you further. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Study how? As we studied the others. Join with us. Become part of the greater whole. Your curiosity will be preserved, expanded, made infinite. The bridge crew exchanged glances. This was the moment they had all known would come. the point where peaceful contact gave way to something far more dangerous. "I'm afraid we must decline," Morrison said formally. "Our people have a saying, we must be free to choose our own path, even if it leads to destruction." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Then, gradually, the massive entity began to withdraw. The probes that had been circling the Defiant moved away, rejoining their parent. "Interesting," the first one said something similar near the end. "Very well, small ones, you may go, but understand the galaxy grows crowded. Species multiply, expand, consume. Eventually, there will be no room for choice. When that time comes, we will be waiting." The transformed fleets began to disperse, flowing away into the deeper reaches of the void. The massive entity sank back into whatever dimension it had emerged from, leaving only the twisted space and the memory of an encounter that had changed everything. "Mr. Petrov," Morrison said quietly, "take us home." Return to the Galactic Council. The emergency session convened within hours of the Defiant's return. The council chamber was packed beyond capacity, with representatives from every major species and several minor ones crowding into the gallery. Captain Morrison stood at the central podium, his report complete, the recorded data from their encounter playing on screens throughout the chamber. The silence was absolute. Finally, General Voron spoke. "You're saying that the missing fleets, they're still alive?" "After a fashion," Morrison replied. "They've been integrated into something larger. Their individual consciousness may still exist, but they're part of a collective now." Chancellor Voss leaned forward. "And this entity, it released you because you didn't resist? It released us because we were curious rather than aggressive. But it made something clear. This is not a permanent reprieve. It's waiting for the galaxy to become more crowded, more competitive. When resources become scarce, when species turn on each other in earnest, it will emerge again." Councillor Korath's voice was grim. "How long do we have?" Morrison consulted his notes. "Based on current population expansion and resource consumption rates, maybe 2 centuries. Perhaps less if we have another major interstellar war." The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. 2 centuries to find a solution to a problem that had consumed 4 of the galaxy's most powerful fleets. Ambassador Chen rose from the human delegation. "There may be another way." All eyes turned to her as she activated the central display. The entity spoke of the first ones, the ancient species that once dominated this region. "Our archaeological teams have been studying their ruins for decades. We've always assumed they died out naturally, but now we know they were absorbed." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "But absorption isn't the only option. The first ones had technology we're only beginning to understand. Dimensional gates, reality anchors, consciousness transfer systems. What if they didn't all get absorbed? What if some of them found a way to escape?" General Voron's neural implants flashed. "You're talking about contacting a species that's been gone for millennia." "I'm talking about finding the survivors, the ones who got away. If anyone knows how to fight this entity, it would be them." The debate that followed lasted for days. In the end, the decision was unanimous. The human fleet would be expanded and equipped for long-range exploration. Their mission: find the surviving first ones and learn their secrets. As the council session ended, Captain Morrison found himself approached by representatives from dozens of species, all offering their support for the mission. The humans were no longer the junior members of the galactic community. They had become its hope. But in the depths of space, beyond the reach of sensors and the comfort of civilization, something vast and patient continued its slow dance through the void, waiting for the galaxy to grow crowded enough, desperate enough, to make the choice between absorption and extinction. The clock was ticking, and time was running out. 6 months later, deep space. The U.S. Defiant, now accompanied by a small fleet of exploration vessels, drifted through the ruins of what had once been the first one's greatest city. The massive structures hung in space like the skeleton of some impossible creature, their surfaces covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Contact," Chen announced from the communication station. "It's faint, but it's definitely artificial. Someone's still transmitting from the central structure." Morrison studied the tactical display. After 6 months of following increasingly faint trails through abandoned systems, they had finally found what they were looking for. "Take us in," he ordered, "nice and slow. If there are survivors in there, they've been hiding for a very long time. Let's not scare them." As the Defiant approached the central structure, a section of the ancient hull began to iris open, revealing a docking bay that was clearly designed for ships much larger than anything in the human fleet. A signal reached them, not the alien concepts of the void entity, but something closer to traditional communication. Mathematical sequences, prime numbers, basic physical constants. First contact protocol. "Responding," Chen said, her fingers dancing over her console. Sending the same sequence back. The response was immediate, a stream of data that their computers struggled to process. When the translation matrix finally made sense of it, the message was simple. "Welcome, young ones. We have been waiting for someone to find us. There is much to discuss and very little time." Morrison smiled grimly. The real mission was just beginning. But somewhere in the void, ancient intelligences stirred. The first one's survivors had been found. The balance was about to shift. And in the cold depths of space, the entity that had absorbed 4 fleets began to move. Its vast consciousness focused on a single, terrible purpose. The galaxy was about to discover that some wars are fought not with weapons, but with the very nature of existence itself. The countdown had begun.